Bacchus, the god of wine, was walking along the shore when he was suddenly ambushed by pirates. Believing him to be a rich prince, the pirates planned to sell him for ransom. When one of the pirates tried to bind his hands, the rope magically fell to the ground. He tried again and again, but the rope always fell to the floor, the knot once again untied. The pirate then looked up and gazed at the unnerving and terrifying beauty of Bacchus. A cold chill washed over him as he realized he was in the company of a god. The pirate ran to the captain and begged to release the young man, but he would not listen. Bacchus smiled a sinister grin, and suddenly vines began to entangle the ship and ensnare the pirates. Music began playing, and the scent of wine filled the air. Suddenly, Bacchus transformed into a lion and ripped into a pirate's throat. The crew fled in terror to the other side of the ship. Bacchus's eyes were like fire, and the first mate began to writhe in agony as he transformed into a bear. The bear then decapitated the captain, and all remaining pirates, overcome with fear, jumped overboard. As they entered the water, they were magically transformed into dolphins. Fools pay a hefty price for getting entangled in the twisted games of the god of madness.
The Joker is one of the most iconic comic book villains. His origins are shrouded in mystery, and in each retelling, he appears in different variations. And just like the Joker, Bacchus is just as mysterious, and there are countless variations in his myths. What we do know is that Bacchus is a very old god. The earliest inscriptions that are found are Mycenaean inscriptions, dating back to the 1300s BC. This is strange because in Greco-Roman mythology, he's normally the youngest of the Olympians and depicted as a god coming from the east, typically India. His status as an ancient deity on one hand and a newcomer on the other has puzzled researchers for many years.
Back in ancient times, you had two choices: water, and no offense, but water sucks, or wine, a drink that required preparation and induced wild states. Wine dates back to at least 6000 BC in the Caucasus region. By 4500 BC, there is evidence it migrated to Greece. From there, it spread to the Italian mainland, and by 800 BC, we have evidence of viticulture by the Etruscans. For the Romans, while they were aware of wine, it did not become important to them until trade with the Phoenicians and Greeks in the southern part of Italy. By 200 BC, the Romans began producing their own wine on a large scale. The southern part of Italy was nicknamed Oenotria, or Land of Wine, for its rich soil and vine variety. People drink when they celebrate, they drink when they mourn. You drink when you don't have a girlfriend, or you drink when your girlfriend won't leave you alone. Drunkenness can make you happy, it can make you sad. It can even make you fight your father on Christmas. It sets you free and reveals your true inner self. It ruins relationships or can lead to new ones. It can even lead to murder. Another aspect of alcohol is its spiritual properties. Drunkenness was considered a form of possession by Bacchus' spirit. It allowed people to experience the spirit world and set free their primal side. Drinking is like playing Russian roulette. Without moderation, it can be extremely dangerous. This is what Bacchus represents.
The earliest iteration of Bacchus was often called Orphic Dionysus or Zagreus. He had secret cultic rituals that included bull sacrifices and speaking to the dead through the art of drunkenness. This version was an unkempt bearded man with curly hair. Jupiter descends into the underworld in the form of a mighty serpent. There he began a love affair with Proserpina, the queen of the underworld. Their union produced Bacchus, fated to rule the cosmos as Jupiter's heir. Hearing of this prophecy, Jupiter then spirited him to Olympus and sat Bacchus upon his own throne and raised high his thunderbolts. Juno seethed with jealousy that a bastard was Jupiter's heir. She needed to get rid of this young boy and future threat, so she released the Titans in order to kill him. The Titans lured the babe with promises of sweets. Once alone, the Titans pounced and tore Bacchus to pieces. All that was left was his heart. Jupiter was distraught. He held Bacchus' tiny heart in his hands. He then swallowed the heart of the young babe in hope that he would recover. Jupiter's fury then turned on the Titans. With one mighty attack, he disintegrated them with the most powerful blast. All that remained were charred skeletons. Months later, tiny Bacchus emerged from Jupiter's leg, fully healed and reborn as the twice-born god.
Later in Greece, Bacchus, also known as Dionysus, became increasingly popular and took Hestia's place on Mount Olympus. Depicted as a bearded man wearing leopard, tiger, or fox skin, he represented the balance between the civilized and the primal nature within. He also became the god of theater, and theater masks were an essential part of his worship. In Athens, there was a large theater constructed and dedicated to him. In the center of the theater stage was an altar where sacrifices would be made to Bacchus before the play. Crowds would gather in March to celebrate the Dionysia festival, where plays, drinking, and music would be had. As drinking can elicit joy, tears, laughter, and fury, Dionysus was considered the perfect patron for comedies, tragedies, and satire. The son of Jupiter and Princess Semele of Thebes. Jupiter was deeply in love with the princess. However, Juno heard about the affair and set a trap for her. Disguised as an old woman, Juno tells Semele that her lover could not possibly be Jupiter, and that if he loved her, he would prove it by showing his true, godly form. Semele then begs Jupiter to promise her something. Jupiter agrees to anything his love desires. She then demands that he prove his love by showing her his true, godly form. Jupiter, being the god of oaths, can never go back on a promise. Her fate was sealed, and he revealed his true form. She turns to ash on the spot. Within the ashes was left the tiny fetus of Bacchus. Jupiter took the fetus and sewed him to his thigh, and 9 months later he gave birth to the baby Bacchus. Juno was pissed and desired to hunt down the newborn. Bacchus was then given to Mercury, who took him to the river nymphs. They raised him for several months before Juno found out. She then sent Madness to the nymphs, and they attempted to rip Bacchus apart. Mercury rushed to Bacchus and saved him before the nymphs could get to him. He then took the babe to Ino, sister of Semele. There, she raised him as a girl in an attempt to remain hidden from Juno. However, it was not long before Juno discovered his location and sent a great flood that covered the city. Mercury again saved Bacchus, and this time took him to Ops, Jupiter's mother. There, Juno had no power, and Ops raised the young Bacchus. She taught him magic and initiated him into cosmic mysteries. Eventually, Bacchus grew and met Silanus, the faun. He taught him the secrets to making wine and became his student. They then set out on a journey around the world, sharing the secrets of winemaking.
The original Roman god, Liber, or Liber Pater, which means free father, represented wine, male fertility, and freedom. Liber's sexual aspect came from the planting of seed, both wine and women. The freedom aspect was highly stressed. The most important parts was the freedom of speech, freedom of mind, and freedom to do what one wanted. And the most important time when boys came of age. An old Roman god, his original lover was Libera, an old agricultural goddess who eventually became Proserpina. His festival, Libernalia, was originally a Roman festival that took place on March 17th. It was especially popular in the countryside and in rural areas. Songs and dances were had, masks were hung on trees, and bull sacrifices were made. People would then parade around a large phallic statue. At the end of the parade, one lucky lady had the honor of hanging a wreath on the statue. Oh god, I'm gonna get demonetized. Liber only had female priestesses. However, his were made up of old women who would bake honey cake and offer sacrifices for anyone who bought them. The most important aspect of his festival is when Roman boys ages 15 to 16 would remove their bulla, a phallic-shaped amulet given to them when they were 9 days old to protect them from evil spirits. They would place their bulla on an altar to Liber and rise, ready to embrace the freedom of adulthood. While originally considered two different gods, Liber was eventually merged with Bacchus and took on many of his aspects.
Eventually, Liber merged with Dionysus and the Roman Bacchus took shape. He was now depicted as a younger, beardless youth. The Romans called him many names but preferred the originally Greek name Bacchus, which comes from Bacchos, which means to be highly agitated. He was now an amalgamation of everything that came before him. He had aspects of death and rebirth, fertility, and the bath salt-inducing madness of Bacchanalias. While Libernalia was officially recognized, Bacchanalias were privately funded parties that came to Rome in 200 BC. These parties were secretive, but violence, poisoning, sacrifices, and orgies were said to have taken place. Eventually, the Roman government had enough, and in 186 BC, the Senate regulated it to 2 men and 3 women max. Plus, you needed prior permission in order to celebrate. The government was concerned about these events because it intermingled the sexes and different social classes. Bacchanalias promoted freedom and unchaining oneself from society's rules. It was rebellion against society, a chance to purge. Even with these regulations in place, Bacchanalias continued, especially in southern Italy, where they were first introduced to the Italian peninsula.
Bacchus and Silanus were in Asia, partying it up, when word reached Bacchus that King Pentheus, his cousin on his mother's side, had outlawed his worship. Worse yet, he claimed that Bacchus' father was not Jupiter, and that his mother Semele was for the streets. He would not believe Bacchus was a god. Bacchus immediately returned to Thebes when he found that he was barred from the city. He calmly made his way up the nearby hills and camped just outside the city, beginning to throw wild parties. Soon, all the women of the city began attending these secret parties, even the king's own mother, Agave. Bacchus decided to give Pentheus one chance to repent and accept his worship. Bacchus disguised himself as one of the priests and met with the king in an attempt to reason with him. King Pentheus would not hear it and threw Bacchus in prison to await execution. However, that night, the chains fell off the god of madness' wrists. An earthquake struck the prison, and a fire started. Bacchus then dared the king to come see the rituals for himself. The king then disguised himself and climbed high into a tree to observe the rituals. Bacchus consents Pentheus, and his followers were whipped into an ecstatic frenzy. Bacchus then cast an illusion on Pentheus. An illusion was cast, and the women of the city saw a lion perched in the tree. The lead cultist, Pentheus' mother Agave, dragged him to the ground. The women then ripped him apart and feasted on his flesh. Agave herself tore off his head, still thinking it a lion, returned to the city to present it to her father. Once in the throne room, Agave's trance wore off, and she realized to her horror what she had done to her son.
Bacchus is known by many names. My personal favorite is Anorchus, which means from the testicles. Bacchus is depicted in a variety of ways. Initially as an older, bearded man, he later took on a younger, more youthful look. He was considered very beautiful, and many epithets comment on his androgynous appearance. He was often seen wearing a grapevine wreath on his head, showing his connection with viticulture. In his Zagreus persona, he was often depicted with horns, a connection with sacrificial bulls. He is often adorned in leopard, tiger, or fox skins, highlighting his connection with the wild and untamed. Bacchus wielded a thyrsus, a long shaft with a fennel, artichoke, or pine cone head. It had a hidden blade which would pop out and when touched to enemies would drive them mad. It was carried by Bacchus and his followers as their main symbol. Theater masks were an important symbol because he was the god of Greek theater. They were often put up during his festivals and worn on people's faces during rituals. Bulls were the most sacred animal to Bacchus. During Bacchic rituals, bulls would often be torn apart and eaten raw, emulating the rebirth of the wine god. Bulls were also a very important chthonic and fertility symbol to the Minoan Greeks. That's basically ancient Greece, showcasing that Bacchus is a very old deity.
The Thyrsus was his triumphant retinue, basically his posse. In fact, the Roman military triumphs were modeled after Bacchus. He had chariots pulled by panthers, leopards, tigers, and elephants. This represents his travels to exotic lands in the east, just like India. Alternatively, he could also be seen riding on a donkey when entering a town. It was a common motif of a conquering king entering a city. Among his retinue, he had fauns and satyrs. The chief faun was Silenus, an older satyr who was tutor and second in command. He was a fat, old drunken man who was said to have uttered prophecies in his drunken state. Satyrs were originally depicted as hairy men with horse tails, ears, and giant erections. They are basically Quagmire from Family Guy. Satyr is where we get satire, or satirical plays. They merged with Roman fauns, who were more playful creatures. Basarids or Maenads were Bacchus's most iconic companions. Female priestesses who wore foxskins. They played music and danced. They could also go crazy and tear people apart, eat babies, burn villages, have orgies. Pretty much Diddy freak-offs. These chicks were wild. As Bacchus was a bit of a rebel, there were few public temples about him. One was the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii, located in a well-preserved area of Pompeii. It showcases magnificent frescoes detailing Dionysian mystery cult initiations and rites. The Temple of Bacchus is in Lebanon. It's the largest temple of Bacchus, built by Emperor Titus Pius. Its dimensions are 66 meters by 30 meters. It is 31 meters high and only slightly smaller than the Temple of Jupiter, and it is the third largest temple in the Roman world. Just like the Joker, on the outside, Bacchus is all fun and games, but if you play with him too much, you might get hurt. In many ways, he's the perfect representation of the power of alcohol. Fun, but dangerous.